Hi, it's Lee, and today I want to show you my Lulu Mayo book. I'm embarrassed. This is A Million Mermaids, and I've ruined it with one of my experiments. So recently I had a video where I'd used markers on a Ziploc bag where you could create a pretty good colouring of something quickly and easily. It wasn't like real colouring, it was a hack. And maybe you could outline it in white or add some more colour. So anyway, I tried to recreate that experiment with a colouring book, actually a few colouring books, and it did not end well. So I actually tried a few to see if it was maybe one book in particular that just wasn't working, and try and conduct a proper experiment. And for some reason, the effect just would not take. And I tried and I tried. I even tried gessoing one of the pages to see if that would work, but it didn't make a difference. Nothing worked. And some of the pages I added some iridescent medium to, so now they've got a little bit of an all over sparkly look. So here I am now with a book filled with failure. But I wanted to see if I could still save the pictures. And maybe where this coloured landed on the page, I could be inspired by that rather than a colour palette. And maybe that will help me colour a page. So I've found a page that I am going to colour. And, it has got a little bit ruined from my experiments. Some of the paper is missing from it. It's peeled off from my multiple experiments. Anyway, we'll see how we go. I'm going to use my 60 set of Colleen pencils that are very well loved. And I don't know what it is. Maybe the colour already on the page, or maybe this is one that I gessoed, but they are going on so smoothly. It's fantastic. They are such a good pencil for the price, and I just love them. I've got quite a few sets of the Colleens that I've been using for years now, and the 120 set, which is just as gorgeous. But I'm trying to save that one because I don't have a spare for replacement pencils like I do with the 60 sets. Now, part of this picture where the shell and the hand is actually torn from my experiment, so you might notice that looking at it. I'm going to have to think of something to fix that. If worse comes to worse, I guess I can just put some cute washi tape on it, but I'll see if it can colour out. And some of this colour hasn't really gone up to the gutter of the book, and I think it's going to be a little bit of an issue when I come to try and colour it out. But we'll see if this failure can be an inspiration. Now, I hope you're all enjoying Mermaid if you're taking part. I didn't intend to join Mermaid, but here I am colouring a mermaid picture. So I guess I'm all in now. Now, at some stage I will speed things up because it's pretty well the same thing throughout the picture, and I'll probably do a little bit offline as well. For those that don't know, I'm nursing a shoulder injury at the moment, and it can be difficult for me to colour for any length of time. But anyway, speaking of mermaids, I thought that we'd try and find a story to match the mermaid theme of the month and the picture that I did. And oh my God, this one's a doozy. And if you think you know how this is going to play out, trust me, there's a twist. So if you are mad about mermaids, then your favourite place might be in Fort Lauderdale Beach. There are so many mermaid-based events that my little mind boggled when I gave it a Google. Now, if you're feeling romantic, you can have a personalised mermaid wedding proposal, and even your bachelor or bachelorette mermaid themed party pre-wedding. And of course, don't forget the wedding rehearsal dinner either, which you can also get mermaid themed. And of course, there's also plenty of offer for the non-mermaid wedding. You can even start your morning with a spot of mermaid yoga and follow it up with a mermaid breakfast. In between, there's an underwater adventure mermaid show, and then afterwards you can dine with the mermaids. Now, all this takes place at the Wreck Bar, which is a themed bar set up to look like the inside of a shipwrecked Spanish galleon. It's a perfect place for mermaids to hang out, and visitors can look through the portholes and see the mermaids swimming around in the pool. Now, I do have to tell you, these are not real mermaids. They are just ladies dressed up as mermaids. The mermaids are far too shy to get jobs performing at hotels. They're busy doing mermaid things and posing for colouring book pictures. Now, one of the events that the Rec Bar is known for is their Friday and Saturday night Medu Serena show. Now, this is a mermaid dance show with a difference. It's burlesque style and it's all performed underwater. It's been performing for about 15 years now in Florida. And if you're there, you might even catch the fire-eating mermaid. I don't know how that works. And it's not just mermaids, there are also mermen as well, something we see very rarely in our colouring books. Now, as I said before, these are not real mermaids. These are people dressed up as mermaids. And like all US citizens, they have rights. And this story is about civil rights. And it's a wild story, and I think most people will be shocked with this one. So back in August 2020, one of the mermaids in the show put on at the Rec Bar, whose name is Whitney Fair, noticed something on one of the outdoor security cameras that she had at her home. Now, it seemed like it was taped over. Upon further investigation, it actually was. And it wasn't Whitney that taped the camera. In fact, Whitney, concerned with her safety, had installed the cameras to give her some peace of mind. Going inside, she went through the footage from the security camera, and what she seen stunned her and frightened her. The most recent piece of footage clearly showed a man bringing a ladder to her home so he could reach the height of the camera. He climbed the ladder with a smile on his face, and it was clearly identifiable. He made no attempt to hide his face. The man was large, balding, tattooed. He could be seen reaching the top of the security camera and then placing tape across the camera, which then rendered it useless. It couldn't see anything. It couldn't record anything of use. When Whitney went back through the camera footage, she noticed that the same man a few days prior again had been in her property. This time it was at night, outside her bedroom window. Now, she did know the man somewhat. His name is Jeff, and he's her neighbour. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst is yet to come. Prior to Jeff and his wife moving in about a year ago, in 2019, she'd actually worked with his wife, whose name is Mia. They were both Aquaticats, which is the name of the mermaids that perform in the show at the Rec Bar. Mia had actually been a mermaid at the Rec Bar long before Whitney joined, since about 2015 or 14. Her husband, Jeff, occasionally came in to watch, and he'd record the mermaid show his wife was in, and Whitney met him there. Whitney felt a bit intimidated by him when Jeff filmed and hung around as voluntary or quasi-security, but Mia felt that Jeff was being protective of all the mermaids. Now, there was a bit of a dust-up between Mia and Whitney in about 2018 article, and it seemed that both women were in an online work chat group. At that time, they got along well enough. According to the article, Whitney felt that Mia was being critical of the manager of the mermaid show, whose name is Wendy Anderson. And according to Whitney, the messages were getting quite toxic, so she left the group chat. From then on, little things seemed to become big problems between the two. Even returning costumes seemed to result in threats. And in July of 2018, Whitney decided that she'd reach out to Mia and try and patch things up between them. After all, they had to work together, but there was no reconciliation. And by August, there was a showdown between the two. They were both by the pool preparing for their performance as mermaids, and Whitney states that she could hear Mia bad-mouthing her to the other mermaids. She told her she was sick of hearing her talking, And Mia told Whitney she was done, basically implying between the two, Mia as the senior mermaid could get Whitney booted from the cast. Now, Whitney then made a comment about Mia's weight, which was something that she knew Mia was very sensitive about. And it was then that the manager, Wendy Anderson, stepped in and Mia was ultimately terminated. Now, apparently, the termination of employment wasn't just about this squabble, but it was a range of issues. And Mia did not take this well. Being a mermaid for Mia was the culmination of a lifelong dream. In 2014, when she was working as a firefighter and part-time at parties and events as Mia the Mermaid, she told the Sun Sentinel that she'd been fascinated with mermaids since she was a little girl in Puerto Rico. So much so that she'd actually almost drowned in a pool at the age of 10 because she put duct tape on her feet to make it look like a tail. She said, I think all girls are fascinated with being a mermaid. It's the mysterious woman who's unobtainable, who's alluring to men, she told the Sun Sentinel. Now, getting the job at the rec bar and being paid to be a mermaid all day, that must have been a career highlight for Mia, even if it was just a part-time job as well as her firefighting work. Now, you are probably thinking that this would be the end of the mermaid mess, but it's just getting started. Mia, with time on her hands, now took to TikTok to discuss her termination and other mermaids in the show, with a particular focus on Whitney. In one video, she claimed that Whitney had a criminal record that would preclude her from running a business in Florida. Now, Mia said in the video that Whitney, quote, had previous law enforcement entanglements, which required her to spend a lot of sleepy overnights at a big institution with prison bars on them. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not talking about I got arrested on a weekend. I'm talking about hard time. Now, Whitney does have a registered business. She actually started an Airbnb business where she lived at the time, and she's also a yoga instructor. And according to an interview, she denied that she'd done hard time and explained that the only arrest in her life was a bit of a dabble with the devil's lettuce when she was about 18, and that resulted in her and her friends spending a week in the local jail. Now, this record was meant to be expunged after 2 years, and therefore it would only be accessible to those that are entitled to access the National Crime Information Centre database. Now, it wasn't just Mia posting on social media. Her husband Jeff was also involved, and some posts were about Whitney, some were about their former boss Wendy Anderson, and sometimes another mermaid, Janelle Smiley. In one post that Jeff wrote on Facebook, he referred to having the mermaids at their home, saying, "We never held the fact that Whitney was a convicted felon drug dealer who spent time in prison against her." Now, of course, Whitney's seen these posts and she was mortified, but she was more than mortified when a year later, in November 2019, Mia and her husband Jeff moved from the plantation area to Fort Lauderdale Beach, right next door to Whitney. Now, this was now getting too close to comfort for Whitney. They were separated now only by a fence. Initially, she thought it might be best to look for somewhere else to live, but as time went on, she decided that she didn't want to run from this problem in her life, and she felt that whatever was happening, it was there for a reason. As I said, she's a yoga instructor, so very zen, and she decided to stay. Now, she was concerned though, so she installed security cameras. Now, Mia and Jeff noticed this, of course, and took to TikTok to complain about the cameras. From their point of view, they felt that the cameras were invasive. They said that they were pointed at their garden, and as two practicing pagans, they often like to do rituals and the like in skyclad, which is a new term I've learnt, which basically means in the nude. So now you have a bit of background. Let's jump ahead to 2020 where we started. This is when Whitney discovered her neighbour Jeff entering her property, climbing up the ladder and tampering with the camera. Now, most people would go to the police and complain about the trespassing. if they didn't want to speak to the neighbour about it. They had actually spoken months before. Well, not really spoken. It was described in an article as a confrontation at the end of Whitney's drive. And Mia was caught on camera screaming at Whitney, "I hope you die." So, not really a conversation. Whitney put off going to the police, but she decided to put up a no trespassing sign. But by Thanksgiving of 2020, Jeff had grabbed a rake and, without stepping onto Whitney's property, careful not to trespass again, he pushed the no trespassing sign over, all within his property line. Now, clearly, the sign, the no trespassing sign, it wasn't going to be a deterrent. Now, things went on, but in December, Whitney called the Fort Lauderdale police, claiming Jeff had again trespassed on her property. According to Jeff, he had put a note in the mailbox complaining about the cameras pointing at his property, but not getting a response, he jumped the fence. Now, Whitney had wanted to avoid the police, but she felt she had little choice now. But she was still reluctant. She was still hoping that the neighbours would just stop, and she said in an interview that she was scared. You see, she had good reason to be reluctant, because the thing I haven't told you yet is who Mia's husband is. The department actually issued Jeff a verbal no trespass warning. And actually, I should give him his proper title, Lieutenant Jeffrey Melez. Now, you see, Mia the mermaid's husband was actually the police. That's right. Jeff, who was actively trespassing on his neighbour's property, was the police that you complain to about things like, trespassing. He also was no rookie cop. He'd actually worked in law enforcement for over 30 years, and 20 of those at the Broward Sheriff's Office. Now, with a trespass warning, he could be criminally charged if he trespassed again. Now, Whitney also went to the Broward Sheriff's Office Internal Affairs Division, where Jeff worked, to lodge a complaint against him. And the next month, in January of 2021, they informed Whitney that they were investigating her complaint. But nothing seemed to happen. Well, not until April of 2021, over Easter, when Lieutenant Jeff Melez confronted Whitney about coloured lights that she'd installed on her property. Now, Whitney was with a friend at the time who immediately recorded this confrontation. And the friend, Pablo, he sort of raised the trespassing allegation against Jeff, who sort of brushed it off with some choice words that I won't say on this PG-friendly channel, and brushed it off as a misdemeanor. Mia, of course, also chimed in to call Whitney a few choice words, again, PG channel, so I won't say what they were, and this was followed up with calling Whitney a felon, screaming out, "How was prison?" and telling her house now looked like a lady of the night's house. Now, they weren't her actual words. I cleaned it up for the channel. There were some other choice words, but I am not repeating them. Suffice to say, it was nasty stuff. Now, believing that Jeff had trespassed again, Whitney again called the Fort Lauderdale Police Department. And she didn't want the neighbours to see that she called the police, so she actually met them the next day secretly at the Galleria Mall. And she brought those officers, as well as the BSO Internal Affairs officers, up to speed on what had been happening. Now, more than I've included here, as well as a sneaky suspicion that she had. You see, when the neighbours referred to her as a felon and asked about prison, it was really concerning for Whitney, because she actually hadn't told anyone that she had, this devil's lettuce charge many years ago. And she was really suspicious that her neighbour Jeff had accessed the police database to find out dirt about her. Now, a few days later, Jeff went back onto Whitney's property again, complaining about the lights, and she accused him of being near her bedroom window at night. He fired back and called her insane, among a few other things. And a few days later, BSO ordered Jeff to cease and desist from any contact whatsoever with Whitney, including on social media, and to refrain from personal visits, harassment, annoyance, threats, telephone calls, or intimidation. Now, the day Jeff received the cease and desist from BSO, he decided to take action himself, and he called the Fort Lauderdale Police Department to tell his side of the story and put it out there on the record. Now, he basically believes, he and Mia, that Whitney's use of the security cameras on the property were invasive and the lights were so bright they were a nuisance. He admitted that he'd gone back onto Whitney's property and argued with her, and that he had climbed the ladder at her home months before. From his point of view, he said that he really initially thought he was looking at a light, and his intention was to unscrew the bulb of the light, noticed it was a camera over. Seems odd that he had duct tape with him, but whatever. Jeff and Mia also involved their lawyers, and in May, their lawyer sent a cease and desist to Whitney to remove the security lights and camera from her property because they violated the couple's reasonable expectation of privacy. Now, Whitney responded stating that her security equipment was actually lawfully placed and had never been used for voyeuristic purposes, and Jeff's documented intrusions on her property only proved that the security measures were actually necessary. She also reported this to the Internal Affairs Division at Broward Sheriff's Office, and in July 16 of 2021, Lieutenant Mellies was given notice of the Internal Affairs investigation, although he would later claim he was initially never notified. Now, they ended up making those orders to cease all contact. Now, as Whitney felt that this ongoing situation was never going to be resolved, she decided that she needed to get some legal advice herself. She wanted a specialist who was adept at police misconduct, and her search brought her in contact with Gary Collin. Now, she told him about the trespassing and the interactions with the couple, and while Gary sympathised, he felt that a civil trespass wasn't worth filing. A civil suit is a private action where individuals can sue one another, as opposed to a criminal suit where it's the police or an authorised agency or government department that brings the action. Now, I can understand why Gary would advise that, as it's costly, it's time consuming, and at the end of the day, it just might not be worth the effort. Now, before he finished the phone call, though, with Whitney, he did have a suggestion for her, and that would change everything. He suggested that she check her records to see if they'd been accessed. Now, Gary clearly is a lateral thinker, and he suggested that Whitney conduct a public records request for all searches made by police and other officials, and he explained to Whitney how to do it. Now, in Florida, they have a lovely legal system which has so many records available for people to look at, and they're just so open about providing it. So Whitney followed her attorney's instructions and did the public records search. Now, the BSO, or Broward Sheriff's Office, they have a computer system which has the acronym DAVID, which stands for Driver and Vehicle Information Database. Now, in that lovely confidential database are all the records your little heart could desire about people: their driver's license, their photos, details of their car, driver history, social security number, lots of good stuff. Now, Whitney had long suspected that her records had been accessed by her neighbour. In a YouTube interview, she said that her neighbours seemed to know things and say things about her that they couldn't have known otherwise. So it came as no surprise to Whitney when the search request was returned, and it showed that Jeff, her neighbour, a lieutenant police officer, had indeed accessed the David system on his work computer to look her up. Now, accessing these records by public officials for anything other than official business is strictly forbidden by federal law. It gets worse though. Whitney was not the only mermaid in the show to have her records accessed on the David system. Her boss, Marina Anderson, and a fellow mermaid, Janelle Smiley, also had their records accessed. Not only that, these records were accessed in 2018 when Mia the Mermaid was very much a part of the mermaid show at the Rec Bar. Now, while Jeff had an order against him forbidding him to contact Whitney, his wife Mia didn't. And Mia kept attacking Whitney and her mermaid friends on social media, saying she wouldn't stop until they ended their hate campaign against her husband. She called them anti-American too for not supporting fallen soldiers in September 2021. And in an Instagram post under the handle Fire Witch Siren, she wrote, "The North remembers female dog, and it's coming for House Zen." So, as I said, Whitney is a yoga instructor, which is often associated with Zen. So I'll let you put two and two together on that, and maybe get 5 or maybe get 4, who knows. She also went on to say that we need to stop supporting these people and their ... ruining businesses and the rec bar. Stop supporting them. They hate this country. They're not shy about admitting it. All of these rants and raves on social media, I mean, keyboard warriors, hey? But the really important thing are these police database records. The internal investigation was underway, and Jeff Mellors was asked to explain why he'd accessed these records. Now, there's always two sides to every story. So, in an interview on 25th of October 2021 with internal affairs officers, Jeff had a chance to tell his side. He claimed that he was accessing the system as part of a criminal investigation. Therefore, as a public official, he had a right to access the records, and nothing dodgy was going on at all. Now, according to the transcript of the interview, Jeff described the issues he had with his neighbour and said that after his wife had left the Mermaid show in 2018, he'd had no contact with Whitney and the others for a while. When they moved in November of 2019 to the rental home in Fort Lauderdale, they were surprised to find that Whitney was their next door neighbour. Jeff said that they figured they'd be adults, they'd keep to themselves, there'd be no problem. However, things escalated from there. According to Jeff, Whitney had set up a Ring camera that pointed directly into their backyard and their private tiki hut area, which Jeff saw as an illegal video voyeurism. And despite multiple requests to the landlord, who was actually the landlord of both properties, to get it removed, Whitney refused to do so. Jeff also claims that Whitney then started harassing them, not by making Facebook and social media posts, but by installing bright floodlights that shone in their home all night. So he said he hopped the fence one night to unscrew the bulb, but it was actually the camera, and she called the police to accuse him of trespassing. He said when the cops showed up, they understood perfectly and they just had Whitney adjust the camera angle. But according to him, she continued to monitor their home with numerous cameras, and she even moved upstairs of the property, which had a window that overlooked their backyard. So one night in Easter, during Easter period, Jeff said she lit up their entire home with bright blue lights, which then prompted another confrontation between the two and with Whitney's boyfriend, and it got a bit aggressive. Jeff said he tried to speak calmly to her the next day, but she claimed to have hundreds of hours of footage of him leering into her windows, which he denied. So in his view, this all stems from some bad blood between Whitney and his wife over the Mermaid show fallout years ago. He believes that Whitney and her 2 friends are now vindictively trying to get him and his wife fired from their jobs by making false complaints and harassment claims. Now, as to the accessing of the records, Jeff claims that this was all done in an official capacity. For him, things started getting a bit suspicious with some of the other mermaid performers. Whitney didn't seem to have any ID or job and was living in a pool house. He thought that was odd. This raised red flags for him. So he had one of his investigative aides run a background check on her to see if she had any warrants or other issues. He claims he didn't recall asking for a David check in particular, though. Another performer, Janelle Smiley, Jeff said was known to get drunk at the bar, and he claimed that she was involved in multiple car accidents and she had a suspended licence. And to verify this, he used the system to look up her driver's license status. As for the organiser, Wendy Anderson, her vehicle licence was run because he spotted her once speeding recklessly in Pompano Beach when he was working at the time. And he wanted to find out where she lived in case any calls came from that area so he could avoid getting involved due to their personal ties. Throughout the interview, Jeff Mellors maintained that even though these background checks were related to his wife's hobby, which he called the Mermaid Show, he considered it official police duty since he was simply verifying if any of these women had outstanding warrants or other legal issues. And he used the broad criminal investigation code when running these checks out of habit from his many years as an investigator. They have a number of codes when they access the system, and criminal investigation is kind of like a broad catch-all code that some people use. Jeff says he's a cop 24/7, and even though the interviewers established that there was no case file, never any police reports or any investigation independent of Jeff's accessing the system, it was his nature to be a cop 24/7. And he was just being a good cop and investigating things he thought were a bit sketchy. According to Whitney, he's a cop that's using the police databases to dig up dirt on people associated with his wife's former employer. Now, when Whitney obtained her records, those public access records, and discovered they'd been accessed using the David system, she also encouraged the others to check theirs as well. And that's when Wendy Anderson and Janelle Smiley noticed that their records had been accessed as well. Janelle, another mermaid, had suspected her records had been accessed because Jeff would often say things about her past, and people were told things about her that she hadn't publicly said. So Whitney, Janelle and Wendy, all of them had their records accessed. They're all suing Jeff and the sheriff, Greg Toney, on the basis that he failed to properly maintain the agency's use of David, as well as the BSO, the Broward Sheriff's Office, not for the trespass which occurred and was the result of a number of reports, but for a violation of civil rights by using the David system, that police database and public officials use, which contains driver's license, security numbers, background, all of that sort of stuff. They're suing all of those people as well for that violation of civil rights that they maintain has happened. Remember, Jeff says it was part of this blanket criminal investigation that he does as a result of being a good cop. Now, the complaint also alleges that Jeff Mellors brought Whitney and Janelle Smiley into public scandal with great humiliation in the form of shame, degradation, mental suffering, and damaged reputations. Now, I haven't told you some of the content of that transcript and the allegations against, the statements that Jeff made against Whitney and Janelle, because they really are not PG rated. So I've left those out, but you can imagine. I don't know whether it's true or not. It'll be up to a court to decide. But that lawsuit was filed in the US federal court in February of 2022. Now, there are a lot of cases of using the David system and abuse of that police database. Doesn't seem to have a lot of punishment attached to it. Sometimes people will get suspended, they'll get written up, or there's training, but there's no sort of real punishment for it. It seems to be a very lame piece of legislation in my point of view. I guess my friends across the pond might be able to tell me differently. Recently, there were some new laws that were passed to raise the fines for misusing the state's driver's database, and it went up from $500 to $2,000 per instance that it was misused. And there are some laws that make it a criminal offence for accessing the information improperly. But it seems to be a bit of a toothless tiger legislation from my point of view, sitting across the pond looking at it. Now, as far as I know, the internal affairs investigation continues against Jeff Mellors. I don't believe any charges or complaints have been made against Mia the mermaid, just Jeff Mellors, the Sheriff's Department, and the individual sheriff against this violation of civil rights. Of course, no doubt they will be arguing that it was a proper police matter. So it'll be interesting to find out. But I guess it's no surprise to you guys that the courts move slower than a snail. And what with the backlog from COVID, it's just added to the overwork system. So what I'm trying to say is, according to court records, this matter still hasn't been resolved, and it's due back in court in January of 2025. Now, I would have liked to have some sort of closure on this case, but the court system is what it is. But I'd love to know what you think about the case and which way you think it will end up. I've got a pretty strong view here where I think it will end up based on the information, the transcripts, and the complaint that I read. But I'd love to know what you think. And that's it. I'm sorry that this mermaid became a toothless tiger at the end. I thought it would have been resolved when I started going down the rabbit hole, but it hadn't been resolved. So I finished up my picture and I did a lot offline. I added some extra stars with the teaser gel pens. They're my favourite brand. I've tried. I just love them. Big shout out to Nicola, who recommended them to me years ago. I've had the box of 12 now for a year or more, and they have no signs of drying up or running out anytime soon, even with the amount of white outlined peaches that I've done recently. And the reason I added extra stars and some extra bits and pieces here and there is that in some places where my experiment landed, it actually peeled and pitted the paper. So I needed something to cover up the bits that had been removed, and pencil wasn't doing that because it was quite pitted in some parts. So I tried to integrate that into the picture. Now, the actual little shell in the Little Mermaid's hand and part of the hand was actually torn on the paper. So I've tried to put a little bit of gel pen in there to sort of cover up that hiccup. But anyway, so that's it from me. I'm still going to use this book, and I'm probably just going to use where the colours have fallen in this experiment gone wrong and colour over it that way and use those colours as my colour palette. We'll see how it goes. But that's it from me. Until next time, stay safe and happy colouring.